I was the golden child who sacrificed everything for my family, but when I finally stood up for myself, they called me selfish. I, 28F, have always been the responsible one in my family, but lately, I feel like I'm drowning under the weight of everyone's expectations. My parents have 3 children, me, my older brother Dylan, 32M, and my younger sister Martha, 24F. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, we were a tight-knit family, but our dynamics were always a bit complicated. From a young age, I was labeled the smart one. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, while my mom quizzed me on multiplication tables. I was only 7, but I knew that getting all the answers right meant a proud smile from my dad and an extra scoop of ice cream after dinner. Dylan, who was struggling with reading at the time, would watch from the living room, his face a mix of confusion and frustration. As we grew older, the pattern continued. I threw myself into every academic challenge, joining the debate team, mathlete club, and student council. My weekends were filled with volunteer work and SAT prep courses. Meanwhile, Dylan found his niche in sports, becoming the star quarterback of our high school team. Martha, the baby of the family, showed a talent for art and fashion from an early age. Our parents, both hardworking middle-class professionals, had big dreams for us. They wanted us to have the opportunities they never had. For Dylan, that meant pushing him to leverage his athletic skills for a college scholarship. For Martha, it was nurturing her creative talents. And for me? It was a constant pressure to be the academic superstar, the one who would bring prestige to our family name. I still remember the day I got my acceptance letter to Yale. My parents were overjoyed, already envisioning their daughter as a future Supreme Court Justice or Fortune 500 CEO. But when I told them I wanted to go to the state university instead, their disappointment was palpable. I explained that I had received a full scholarship there and didn't want to burden them with Yale's hefty tuition. They reluctantly agreed, but I could see the dreams fading in their eyes. Fast forward to now, and I'm in my second year of law school at the same state university. I chose law because it seemed like a good compromise, a prestigious career that would make my parents proud, while still allowing me to pursue my interest in social justice. I'm at the top of my class and working part-time at a local law firm to cover my living expenses. Dylan, on the other hand, went to an Ivy League school for both his undergrad and MBA, racking up nearly $300,000 in student debt that my parents are still paying off. His football career didn't pan out after a knee injury in his sophomore year, but our parents were determined to see him succeed. They poured money into tutors, internships, and networking events, anything to give him an edge in the business world. Martha is in her final year of a fashion design program at a prestigious art school in New York City, which costs about $50,000 per year. She's always been the free spirit of the family, and our parents indulge her artistic whims, from impromptu trips to art galleries in Paris to expensive sewing machines and design software. The disparity in how my parents treat us became glaringly obvious last Christmas. We all gathered at our childhood home, the smell of Mom's famous apple pie filling the air. After dinner, as we sat around the Christmas tree, the gift-giving began. Dylan received a brand new car, a sleek, black BMW, as a gift for working so hard at his entry-level finance job. Martha got an all-expenses-paid trip to Paris Fashion Week, complete with front row seats to all the major shows. My gift? A $50 gift card to a local bookstore and a reminder to keep studying hard. I forced a smile and thanked them, but inside, I felt a familiar ache of disappointment and resentment. But it's not just about the material things. It's the constant expectation that I'll be available to help with everything. When our grandmother, 75F, fell ill last year, guess who was expected to drive 3 hours every weekend to take care of her? Me. Not Dylan, who lives closer but was too busy with work. Not Martha, who was focusing on her final year projects. Just me, juggling law school, a part-time job, and now, elder care. I remember one particularly exhausting weekend. I had just finished a grueling week of midterms and driven to Grandma's house. As I was helping her with her medication, my phone buzzed. It was my mom, asking if I could stop by their house on my way back to help with a few things. Those few things turned into hours of yard work, grocery shopping, and fixing their computer. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was past midnight, and I still had a paper to write for Monday. The situation reached a boiling point last month during my final exams. I had been studying nonstop for weeks, barely sleeping or eating. My tiny studio apartment was a mess of coffee cups, takeout containers, and law books. The night before my most important exam, my mom called. I almost didn't answer, but years of conditioning kicked in. She insisted that I needed to come home immediately because Martha was having a crisis over her portfolio submission. Apparently, her computer had crashed, and she needed help recovering her files. I tried to explain that I couldn't possibly leave, that this exam could make or break my GPA, but my mom guilt-tripped me, saying, "Your sister needs you. Family comes first." Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, or the accumulation of years of feeling overlooked, but I snapped. I told her that I was tired of always being expected to drop everything for everyone else while my own needs and accomplishments were constantly overlooked. I recounted all the times I had sacrificed my own plans to help the family, all the while receiving little recognition or support in return. I said that if this continued, I would consider cutting contact after graduation and moving far away from my career. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, my mom started crying, saying I was being selfish and ungrateful. She brought up all the sacrifices they had made for us, how hard they had worked to give us opportunities. She accused me of not caring about my family and hung up, leaving me feeling guilty and conflicted. Now, a month has passed, and I'm torn. Part of me feels guilty for lashing out, for hurting my mom's feelings. I keep replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But another part of me feels relieved to have finally stood up for myself, to have voiced the frustrations I've been bottling up for years. My grades came back, and despite everything, I managed to maintain my position at the top of my class. But there was no one to celebrate with, no congratulatory call from my parents. The achievement feels hollow without my family to share it with. I'm at a crossroads. Do I reach out and try to mend fences? Apologize for my outburst and fall back into old patterns? Or do I stick to my guns and prioritize my own well-being for once? Am I the asshole for wanting to be recognized and respected by my family? I love my family, I really do. But I'm starting to realize that love shouldn't come at the cost of my own happiness and success. I'm tired of being the family fixer, the reliable one who never complains. I want to be seen for who I am, not just for what I can do for others. As I sit here in my quiet apartment, surrounded by law books and unanswered messages from my family, I can't help but wonder, is it possible to find a balance between being there for my family and taking care of myself? Or am I destined to always feel like I'm falling short, no matter what I do? Update 1, it's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. Your words have helped me gain perspective on my situation and gave me the courage to take action. After much deliberation, I decided to reach out to my family. I sent a group text to my parents, Dylan and Martha, explaining that I wanted to have a family meeting to discuss our relationships and expectations. To my surprise, they agreed. We set a date for the following weekend at my parents' house. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with anxiety. I found myself obsessively planning what I wanted to say, writing and rewriting my thoughts in a worn notebook. I even considered backing out a few times, but the memory of all those years of feeling overlooked steeled my resolve. When the day finally arrived, I drove to my childhood home with a mix of dread and determination. As I pulled into the driveway, I was transported back to countless family dinners, holiday celebrations, and heated arguments that had taken place within those walls. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. My mom answered, her face a mixture of concern and wariness. The house smelled of her signature lasagna, a peace offering, perhaps? We gathered in the living room, the tension palpable. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, while my family looked at me expectantly. I started by acknowledging that I could have handled the phone call with my mom better. I apologized for my harsh words but also expressed how hurt and overlooked I've felt for years. I recounted specific instances, the Christmas gifts, the constant expectation for me to drop everything for family emergencies, the lack of recognition for my achievements. My voice shook at times, but I pushed through, determined to make them understand. The reaction was mixed. My dad seemed genuinely shocked. His face paled as I spoke, and he kept shaking his head in disbelief. When I finished, he was the first to speak. I had no idea you felt this way, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We never meant to make you feel less valued. You've always been so capable, so independent. I guess we just assumed you didn't need as much support. He apologized and promised to be more mindful in the future. My mom, on the other hand, was defensive at first. She insisted that they've always treated us equally and that I was being overly sensitive. We've always been proud of you, she said, her voice rising. But you can't expect us to constantly praise you for doing what you're supposed to do. But as the conversation progressed and my siblings chimed in with their own perspectives, she began to see things differently. Her anger melted into tears as she admitted that she often relied on me because she knew I would always come through, and she hadn't considered how that was affecting me. Dylan's reaction surprised me the most. He confessed that he'd always been jealous of me, of my grades, my drive, and our parents' pride in my achievements. You made it all look so easy, he said, running a hand through his hair. I felt like I could never measure up. That's why I pushed for the expensive schools and high-paying job. I thought maybe then I'd finally earn the kind of respect you always seem to have. It was eye-opening to realize that my golden child status had affected him too, just in a different way. Martha was quiet for most of the conversation, picking at a loose thread on her designer jeans. But when she finally spoke, her words were filled with remorse. She apologized for taking advantage of my help, admitting that she often called me for crises because she knew I would drop everything to assist her. "I never realized how much pressure we were all putting on you," she said softly. "I promise to be more self-reliant in the future." As the conversation continued, more long-buried feelings and misunderstandings came to light. We talked about our childhood, our parents' expectations, and how those expectations had shaped our relationships with each other. There were tears, raised voices, and moments of uncomfortable silence. But there were also instances of understanding, of seeing each other in a new light. By the end of the meeting, which had stretched into the evening, we had all agreed to make some changes. 1. My parents promised to acknowledge my achievements more and to be more equitable in their treatment of us. They also agreed to stop using guilt as a way to manipulate us into doing things. 2. Dylan and Martha agreed to step up more when it comes to family responsibilities. Dylan offered to take over the care of our grandmother every other weekend, and Martha said she'd start calling our parents for help instead of always relying on me. 3. I committed to being more assertive about my needs and limitations, and to communicate more openly when I'm feeling overwhelmed or underappreciated. 4. We decided to start a new family tradition of monthly dinners where we can check in with each other and address any issues before they escalate. As I drove home that night, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. The meeting had been draining, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt truly heard by my family. The next day, I received a text from my mom. It was a simple "I love you," followed by a heart emoji. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. While I'm cautiously optimistic, I know that real change will take time and effort from all of us. Old habits die hard, and I'm sure there will be slip-ups and disagreements along the way. But I'm proud of myself for speaking up and initiating this conversation. It's a start, but I'm keeping my guard up and will continue to prioritize my well-being. After all, this is just the beginning of what I hope will be a long journey of healing and growth for our family. Update 2. It's been about a month since our family meeting, and I wanted to provide another update. Things have been interesting, to say the least. The good news is that my parents have been making a noticeable effort. Last week, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a care package with some of my favorite snacks, the kind my mom used to pack in my lunchbox when I was in elementary school. There was also a handwritten note expressing how proud they are of me and acknowledging my hard work in law school. It wasn't anything extravagant, but the thoughtfulness behind it meant more than any expensive gift could have. My dad has been reaching out more too. He's started sending me articles about interesting legal cases, and we've had some engaging discussions about them. It's nice to feel like he's taking an interest in my chosen field, rather than just expecting success. Dylan has also been stepping up. When our grandmother needed help moving some furniture, he volunteered to do it without anyone having to ask. He even sent me a text afterward, joking about how he now understands why I always seemed so tired of helping her. It was a small gesture, but it showed that he's trying to be more aware of the family responsibilities I've been shouldering. He's also been reaching out to me more, and we've had some good conversations about our childhood and our current relationship. Last weekend, we met up for coffee and ended up talking for hours. We laughed about some of the ridiculous competitions we used to have as kids, like who could eat their vegetables faster at dinner. But we also delved into deeper topics, like the pressure we both felt to live up to our parents' expectations in different ways. It feels like we're finally starting to understand each other better, to see beyond the roles we were assigned in our family dynamic. Martha, however, has been a different story. At first, she seemed to be making an effort. She stopped calling me for every little crisis and even offered to help me with some research for one of my law school papers. She said she wanted to understand more about what I do, which was a nice change from her usual self-focus. But last week, things took a turn. I got a frantic call from her at 2 a.m. She was sobbing, barely coherent, saying she had a huge fashion show coming up for her final project and nothing was ready. She begged me to come to New York to help her finish her designs. The old me would have immediately started packing a bag, ready to swoop in and save the day. But I remembered our family meeting and the promises we'd all made. I took a deep breath and gently reminded her of our agreement. I suggested some alternatives, like asking her classmates for help or speaking to her professors about an extension. I even offered to brainstorm ideas with her over the phone, but I stood firm on not dropping everything to fly to New York. She didn't take it well. Her sobs turned to anger, and she accused me of abandoning her. "You're supposed to be the reliable one," she yelled. "If you really cared about me, you would drop everything to help. This is my future we're talking about." When I stood firm, she hung up on me. The next day, my mom called. Apparently, Martha had called her in tears, saying I refused to help her in her time of need. My mom tried to guilt me into going, saying, "She's your sister. You should be there for her. Family comes first, remember?" I'll admit, I lost my cool a bit. The familiar feeling of being taken for granted, of having my own needs ignored, came rushing back. I reminded my mom of our family meeting and the promises we'd all made. I told her that if she continued to enable Martha's behavior, nothing would ever change. I also pointed out that I had my own responsibilities and challenges, and it wasn't fair to expect me to always be the one to sacrifice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I braced myself for an argument. But then my mom surprised me. She sighed deeply and said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have tried to pressure you. I'll talk to Martha." I later found out that my mom not only talked to Martha but also refused to help her herself, insisting that Martha needed to learn to handle her own responsibilities. Martha was upset, but she managed to pull her show together on her own, with help from her classmates, just as I had suggested. A week after the fashion show, Martha called me. Her voice was subdued, lacking its usual dramatic flair. She apologized for her behavior and admitted that the experience had been a wake-up call. "I realized how much I've been relying on you," she said. "And how unfair that's been. Your suggestion to ask my classmates for help. It actually led to some great collaborations. I think my collection was better for it. This situation has made me realize that change is hard and old habits die hard. There have been moments of progress and moments of frustration. Last week, during our monthly family dinner, Dylan made a joke about me being the family's personal assistant, and I felt that old resentment bubbling up. But before I could say anything, my dad stepped in, reminding everyone of our commitment to change. It was a small moment, but it meant a lot to see him standing up for me. I'm proud of myself for standing my ground, even when it was difficult. And I'm cautiously hopeful that we're all learning and growing from this experience. It's not perfect, and I don't expect it ever will be. But it feels like we're moving in the right direction. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my original post, and I wanted to give a final update on how things have progressed with my family. The biggest news is that I've graduated from law school. The day of my graduation was surreal. As I sat among my fellow graduates, listening to the commencement speech, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. Not just the late nights studying and the grueling exams, but the emotional journey with my family as well. I was worried about how my family would react, given our history, but I was pleasantly surprised. My parents organized a small celebration dinner and everyone showed up. Dylan even flew in from out of state to be there. It wasn't a lavish affair, just a reservation at my favorite local restaurant, but the fact that they all made the effort meant more to me than any expensive gift. During the dinner, my dad made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. He acknowledged how hard I've worked, not just in school but in our family dynamics as well. He apologized again for the times they'd taken me for granted and expressed how proud he was of the person I've become. It wasn't perfect or eloquent, but it was sincere, and that's what mattered. Martha has made significant progress too. After the fashion show incident, she seemed to have a wake-up call. She's been making a concerted effort to be more independent and has even started volunteering at a local community center, saying she was inspired by my dedication to helping others. Last month, she handled a crisis with her apartment lease all on her own, and made a point of telling me about it afterward. "I wanted you to know that I didn't even think about calling you for help," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "I figured it out myself." Dylan and I have continued to build our relationship. We've started a tradition of weekly phone calls where we catch up on our lives and sometimes reminisce about our childhood. It's been healing for both of us to address some of the unspoken competition and resentment that had built up over the years. During one call, he confided in me about some struggles he's been having at work. Instead of trying to solve the problem for him, I just listened. Afterward, he thanked me, saying it was nice to be able to vent without feeling judged. As for me, I've accepted a job at a law firm in a city about 2 hours away from my family. It's close enough to visit regularly but far enough to maintain my independence. When I told my family about the job, they were supportive and even offered to help with the move, without any guilt trips or expectations. Our monthly family dinners have continued, and while they're not always perfect, they've become a space where we can openly discuss issues and celebrate each other's achievements. We're all learning to communicate better and to respect each other's boundaries. I won't pretend that everything is perfect now. We still have our moments of tension and old habits sometimes creep back in. Last month, my mom slipped into her old pattern of asking me to mediate a disagreement between her and Martha. But this time, instead of automatically taking on the responsibility, I gently reminded her that it would be better for them to work it out themselves. It was uncomfortable, but it was progress. Looking back on the past 6 months, I'm proud of how far we've all come. I'm grateful that my family was willing to listen and make changes. Most importantly, I'm proud of myself for standing up for my needs and maintaining my boundaries. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. As I embark on this new chapter of my life, I feel more confident and supported than ever before. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support throughout this journey. Your encouragement gave me the strength to advocate for myself and ultimately improve my relationships with my family.